Okay, we're here today to clean the Ruger Gunsite Scout, the Whoop 308 that we took to the range earlier today. So the first thing that's important to do is to ensure that this gun is fully unloaded and there's no ammo on the table. If you look, the safety on this is a 3-position safety. It's in the safe position at the moment, and in the safe position it hooks the bolt and prevents the bolt from operating either forward or backward, as well as locking the cocking piece so that there's no way the firing pin can drop. I'm going to pull this back to the load-unload position. I'm going to grab the frame of the rifle, nowhere near the trigger, pull the bolt back, and confirm that the chamber is empty. It's real important to always double check, make sure they're unloaded. The next step then is, let's go ahead and remove the bolt. To remove the bolt, there is a lever here on the side of the gun that you pull out, and then the bolt will simply, I'm going to pull it all the way out, bolt simply slides off. And it's a good idea when you're cleaning a bolt gun, after you chamber check it, just pull the bolt off. At this point the gun is completely safe. Now we'll go ahead and we'll start with cleaning the bolt. So move the rifle out of the way. And in case it was difficult to see earlier as I was trying to remove the bolt, because it does take 2 hands, this right here is the bolt release, and there's a little protrusion at the top of it that you can put your finger on to pull it back. That allows you to remove the bolt, and also we'll be using that same thing a little bit later when we reinstall the bolt. So now with the bolt out, we'll go ahead and clean the bolt. The bolt's relatively easy to clean because on a bolt gun there's no gas coming back here to cycle the action. So there's very little residue that actually will get on the bolt, but you want to clean it every time. And basically all I'm going to do is take a damp patch and wipe the whole bolt down. And I want to make sure that if in case any, you had any blow bypass the primer, make sure the breech face is clean. And in a bolt gun, that's pretty much all it takes to clean the bolt. Periodically, you may want to, on this particular bolt, the extractor sits alongside the bolt and there's a bit of a gap, and you may want to slide the patch up underneath there and run it back and forth and make sure that anything that got up in there is removed. And now the bolt is cleaned, and we'll set this aside. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean the bolt guides inside of the open part of the rifle. And again, mostly they'll be fairly cleaned because without being gas operated like an AR or a semi-automatic, there's very little that will come back here. And I'm going to clean the magazine well, which might be easily cleaned from this side. The next step is to clean the chamber and the feed ramp. That will start to get a little bit dirty because depending on how quickly you eject the spent case, there may still be some gas up in there. So I'm going to clean that. Once you get into that, it may be easier to put the patch on a rod, because it can be a bit difficult to get your fingers up in there. Now I'm using a plastic rod, so I don't have to worry about scratching anything. If you're using a steel rod, you want to make sure that you use a holder so that there's nothing metal touching metal, because you don't want to gouge your feed ramp and you don't want to gouge the locking lugs or any part of the chamber. So now that I've got that clean, and you notice the patch stayed fairly clean, so there's very little up in there. Now it's time to actually clean the barrel. I've got a tipped in fiberglass rod, so I don't have to worry about scratching the barrel up and the threaded piece is brass, which is softer than the steel, so even if it does contact the steel, it's unlikely to harm it. Got a little loop to put my patch in. And I'm going to take the patch. Get some solvent on it. Oops, I spilled a little bit. I let my finger off just a hair too soon. Now the easiest way on a bolt action gun to feed this is to actually pass it through the bolt guide, right down into the chamber and down the length of the barrel. When it comes out the other side, you'll see that there's a little bit of residue on it, not as much as you might expect. There's going to be in a second, because now we're going to run a brush down through the barrel. Alright, pull this back through. Remove this. And put on a brass brush. So now I have a brass brush, and I'm going to take the patch, put it over the brush, put a couple drops of solvent on the, whoops, more than a couple drops that time. That's hard to do, but using the patch instead of putting the solvent directly on the brush prevents it. Even though I put a little too much, it didn't spill all over the table because the patch caught it. Okay, after a brief interruption to change a battery, we'll resume. I've got my dampened brush. I'm going to be a little more careful, making sure I don't smack this around on the brushed finish. Slide this up into the chamber and push it through. I'm going to push it all the way through before trying to change directions, because the brush can bind in the barrel if you try to change directions while you're in the barrel. And then I'm going to pull it back through. And I'll go back through one more time just to make sure if there's anything. Take my brush off. I'll use the original patch one more time before switching to a new patch. And you'll notice that this time the patch came out significantly more dirty. The brush loosened up all the deposits in the barrel. So get a clean patch. Dampen it. Do it this time if I can do it without lifting my finger early and getting it all over the table. Mount the patch on my hook and pull it back through. Bring it all the way out, and I'll go back through again. And you notice it pulled back quite a bit of residue this time. You may see it here. I'm going to go through, I'll go through back and forth twice with this patch before I change it. All the way out. All the way back. And this one's a lot cleaner, but it still had quite a bit of residue on it. Patch through. Now this patch is actually fairly clean. I'll run this patch through a couple more times and then I'll check the barrel. Yep, so I believe that I've got this one nice and clean. Solvent so I don't knock it over and have it all over the place. And time to check the barrel. I'm going to attempt to show this on camera, but it's relatively difficult to do. But what you'll do is hold the barrel up to a light source of some sort and look down through the barrel, see if you can see anything. I've got the light on it so that you can see it on the camera, and then when I actually try to look at it, I'm just going to use the overhead light. So I'm going to gun up, point it up to the overhead light, and I'm looking down the barrel, see if I can see any kind of deposits or dark spots. Barrel looks nice and clean. So it's time to oil and reassemble this rifle. On a bolt action gun, you really don't need a significant amount of oil. What I'll usually do is take a Q-tip, put a little bit of oil on the end of the Q-tip, and then I'm just going to wipe the bolt guide rails on both sides with that oil dampened Q-tip, just to get a film of oil on them. And then I'm going to oil the bolt, which we had cleaned earlier. And I use my finger. You can use the other end of the Q-tip if you want. But I put a couple drops of oil on the back of the extractor. Then a couple of drops of oil on the other side of the bolt. And you know, we're talking about drops here. We're not putting any significant quantity. Wipe the locking lugs with it. And you'll notice that I'm keeping my finger away from the firing pin hole in the breech face, the bolt face. You don't want to get any oil down into that firing pin mechanism. I'm basically just wiping it on the outside of the bolt. I've lubricated the guides. Take my oil dampened finger right there, and now it's time to reinstall the bolt. To put the bolt back in, you line the locking lugs and you line the extractor up with the locking lug on the bolt handle side. And then if you look at the back of the gun, you'll see that it's a somewhat rectangular shape. That will coincide with the shape of the bolt. You slide the bolt in, pull back on the bolt release lever that I showed you earlier to clear the lock, and then just slide the bolt in. Release the lever, and the bolt is reinstalled. Cycle the bolt just to make sure it operates smoothly. And then operate the safety from the fire to the load unload to the safe position. Make sure that the safety operates smoothly and then it locks into each of those positions. Because if the safety's loose or not locking, you could have it unsafe and it could vibrate out. You'll notice it's kind of hard to tell looking at it, but it takes a little bit of force for me to move that safety from position to position, and it wants to stay in those individual positions. And that's a properly working safety. At this point, this rifle is clean. It's ready to be either put away or taken back to the range. Thanks for watching.